It is my pleasure to introduce and call up Professor Katie Hinko from Michigan State University here. You all know Katie, so I won't belabor the point. I'll give her the floor in about 30 minutes when I'm finished introducing her. Katie has been a long-standing practitioner first in the space of informal and non-formal learning environments, has been then an actor and a broadener. If you know about our PISEC program, and in fact it is the cause for why we are standing here today, she is the one who pivoted that from sort of an ancillary activity into a core form of identity in the Physics Frontier Center here in Gilla that engages. And she's launched a huge succession of just tremendous scholars, both mentoring and whatnot, and the legacy that she has left for so many who have been directing this particular program. She leads a renowned program on research on learning in informal environments, and will present some framing to us today. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Noah. I appreciate that time to get ready. Oh, what an amazing moment to share listening to those comments. I think that that's like a really nice transition into this topic that we're all gonna work on for the first half of the morning about researching informal physics education with the sub sort of idea of like, can we leverage research to understand, develop, and advocate for informal physics and public engagement programs? I think, as I'll share in a couple slides, like a lot of us know and feel as practitioners, as people doing work, that there are experiences that can be transformative, right? That we know. And then like for participants, for ourselves, right, audiences, the question is sort of how can we document that to some degree in order to improve, advocate, ask for funding, that kind of thing, right? And so I think let's brainstorm on some thoughts today. So I'll just say very cognizant of time, quickly a little bit about me. My physics story has been shaped by informal. I just have a lot of pictures on this slide. Before I went to undergrad, I had a lot of experiences playing in a lab that my mom, who was in pharmacology, worked in, just playing with models in the corner. I got to go to a wonderful hands-on museum as a kid called the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum, and like standing inside a bubble, which is the same demo this kid is doing, is like core memory to me, being able to make a bubble go around you. And as a senior in high school, I got to go on a senior trip. This is my high school sister Irene. I got to go on a trip to Fermilab and like shadow grad students for a week, because it turned out someone in my class's uncle was the director of Fermilab at the time. That was just real random, because my backup plan was shadowing the local park rangers around, which was actually quite an interesting idea that I could have done that, and that would have been a fun life as well. But when I was an undergrad at Ohio State, a big part of my work or the experiences that I had was taking classes. There's a little clip or little picture from my like research project, but I got involved in the SPS group that did demos and helped faculty with demos, and that's me helping someone lay on a bed of nails. And then as part of that, I worked at the Columbus Science Museum for 6 months in an after-school program. And I just think like that is the start of me feeling like this is how I feel connected to physics. This is the most meaningful part. Like I like the other parts too, but this is the part that makes me want to generate more work, right? And then after, this is just funny, I did some REUs. I went to grad school at University of Texas, where I also was like lucky to be part of a structure that had a TA position for doing outreach, like as a graduate student. So that's me, went around to all kinds of elementary and middle schools in the Central Texas area doing presentations. And then I came here as a postdoc and as the director of PISEC. And it was just such a generative place to not just be thinking about what good experiences I was having and what that meant for me, but like, how can I bring my research sort of training from kind of going through experimental physics PhD, traditional physics sort of route, into that space, but how can I really change my understanding of like humans are the most complex problems, not physics, the idea concepts. Humans are the most complex things to try to understand. And so I really had a wonderful time here. So I definitely want to mention that's an important part of my introduction. I've been at Michigan State now for a while in a faculty position where I'm continuing doing research and teaching. So that's just a little bit about me and my story and how formal and informal have been influential. Okay, before I talk any more about our big idea, I want us to get some ideas out. So you all have paper. There's 2 very short writing or drawing things that we're going to do. So this is the first one. And I just want to oops, yeah, actually, let's go back. I just want to give a shout out to ideas about, we're going to draw, again, like we did on the first day. So ideas about metaphors. You know, later in the talk, if I have time, I might tell you a little bit about doing work on what is like the landscape of informal physics programming. Has been a research project that I've been working with a lot of folks here. And like landscape is an interesting metaphor, right? Like we use that in a lot of work talking about that. It can really help frame. A metaphor can really help, you know, frame how we're approaching a problem. And there's different types of landscapes too. These are just 2 Colorado ones I chose for the talk. And so anyway, just thinking about how, like, you know, is a landscape metaphor useful? Is an ecosystems metaphor useful? Is a life cycle? There's all different kinds of metaphors. And when we were discussing what should be in this research presentation, we also talked about like, what are some, you know, we want to talk about an overview of research that exists and is done, but also like what are holes? That was a word we used, holes. And so I was like, oh, holes. But that's an interesting metaphor as well, right? Is it missing things, or is it more like we need to go identify that plant more carefully, right? There's just different things. So, okay, that's my little spiel about how I'm very into thinking about metaphors and visual representations as a way to explore ideas. So here's what we're going to do. I do this when I teach class. Every class, actually, we do a daily drawing. So you all did one yesterday, so you're back at it today. So this is inspired by Linda Berry, who's a comic artist and a faculty member who teaches people how to draw comics. So your job is to draw an image or an object, whatever that means to you, that represents research, which I probably should have put in quotes because we didn't define that yet. Research, whatever you think about that, in informal physics, okay? So here's what we can do. You just might think about this collection of words, none of which have been defined, right? And what does that mean to you? What feelings does that bring up? You don't need any drawing skill, right? You can just draw stick figures or anything you want. But words are okay, but maybe not too many, right? We're looking for a visual thing. And I'm gonna say let's go with a minute and a half. I might shorten us to a minute and a half, okay? All right, are we ready? Yes. Okay. And then I may ask people to share, but you won't have to share it. So just so you know, if you don't want to, if it's a good drawing. Okay, go ahead and get started. What's fun about this exercise to me is that this can feel really challenging for people sometimes to actually get through that whole amount of time, right? It's interesting, like, to note that for yourself. Like, we draw things all the time in physics context, right? So drawing something sort of outside of a traditional physics diagram, right, can feel like kind of stressful, I think, sometimes. When you feel like not an artist, you maybe ever change that. So I would just like to take, I don't want to spend too much time because we have some other stuff to talk about, so we can't have everyone share out, but we're going to go into breakout groups coming up. And so I think that is like a perfect time to sort of do that. Honestly, like, I just want to say, none of these ideas are wrong, right? They're just our ideas, right, that we have. So I think it's just, to me, this is like a really useful exercise to bring up ideas and to look at this idea, and I have a slide with some terms here, like of what is quote unquote research, what are we doing, how can we see it from a bunch of different sort of angles, and what's the, you know, how can that listening to other people's ideas help us, you know, maybe think about a different picture for ourselves. So okay, so this is kind of fun to think about what is the right order of presenting information. So I guess that one thing, oops, oh, I animated that kind of funny. One thing there it goes. Okay, one thing that I feel like I wanted to to bring out is this idea of what is research, right? That I sort of asked everyone to draw something about a word that we didn't define. And I think the idea of research, also the word assessment and evaluation, these are not, I'm not putting out definitions that are the definitions, because there are not the definitions. There are just different interpretations of these things that are different in different kinds of research or in learning communities too, right? But I just wanted to toss out this idea that when we are thinking about, especially for like this white paper and ideas about research, you know, research tends to be having a goal of producing more generalizable knowledge. It's tending to be used to develop theories or test hypotheses. If you're doing it at a university, it requires some type of IRB approval for human subjects research. And that often it's getting published in peer-reviewed journals first, like, and it may be getting disseminated in other ways also. And so these are some kind of distinguishing pieces about the idea of labeling what you're doing as research. Assessment is, you know, and as evaluation all have sort of similar data collection analysis ideas too, but you might suggest that assessment is collecting information for improving a specific area, and that often folks who identify as doing assessment are focused on one program or one institution or one group and thinking about that. And evaluation, again, these are not definitive, but thinking about how is a program working? Like my goal is to try to figure out how my program is working. So I'm looking at program goals or standards and determining if I'm meeting them. And so instead of maybe publishing in peer-reviewed journals, I'm publishing things in like reports or that kind of space. And then there's a helpful, I felt, graphic from this group. You know, there's all kinds of different graphics, kind of thinking about different purposes, audiences, or focuses that kind of distinguish these different things. But what we know is sort of true, right, is that there are so many different varieties of informal learning formats and environments, all of which we've been sharing with each other today, right, that there's not just one methodology or tool or motivation, right, that's spanning all those things. And I want to suggest, since we're in a friendly group, that this is different than a lot of formal research in formal physics education, right, where there's a, you know, everyone's studying introductory physics classes, right, have a much more homogeneous compared to like set of conditions, right, compared to people who are investigating these things and all of us coming together, right? And so why should we study informal learning? This is not in any possible way comprehensive, and I think that's part of what we're going to talk about in more of the discussion. But if we kind of think about different, this is heavily animated. Okay, so if we think about different aspects, we could think about, well, we might want to study our program to characterize its outcomes and impacts on participants, to identify places for improvement in curriculum and structures. We might want to justify the existence of our programs to university, other faculty, students. It's part of that values proposition that we were talking about yesterday. For working with partners, we want to determine value to all groups involved, identify issues that require change. And for funding is part of justifying your existence, so we need to apply for grants or internal funding, right, and justify receiving them. So these are some ideas. I also want to put out this idea that it allows us to define the state of the field, like what we care about, like what we study, what we assess, what we evaluate, what we research, defines what we're doing, right? And so if we don't do this, other people can do this, right? So if we want to say, Shannon was talking about yesterday, that the most important thing is if someone feels that they can do it, not if someone learned that skill. We, as the people who are maybe taking on that research evaluation or assessment, right, get to set that out there, right? I also just want to put out there, since someone mentioned, since Ed mentioned the bell jar, that I think that something that is true, like I mentioned at the beginning, for a lot of us, is that we feel that there's something special about our informal spaces, right? Especially for practitioners. You know, we've all had the experience of other folks. We all have the experience of for folks flying here, of sitting next to someone on the plane and then lying about what our job is, right? Or something to that degree, right? Or people having a really negative reaction, right? So this is perfect. This book called The Bell Jar, right? If you haven't read it, lovely read, right? This is a famous quote from this book by Sylvia Plath, where like the main character is really having is a college student having a lot of emotional struggles, and this is a sentence about their experience in physics class. And I encounter that with students in my undergraduate classes. This is just not to go into this too much in detail, but I just ask everyone at the beginning of the semester, this is just from the fall, how much anxiety do you feel about this course? Like 30% of my students in the fall are giving themselves an 8, 9, or 10. Right, so very negative. And if you ask them about their capability and then you compare the two, you see that a lot of people are just super anxious, very stressed, very nervous. And just contrast this to this kind of experience. This is just a PISEC example from a long time ago. Let's see if it displays. Won't display. That's my favorite 5-second clip, right? Because you can see that that is very different. You could pull those kids maybe, right? And they're not having that same reaction as these 18-year-old people who are taking this physics class as a non-major in college, right? So how can we try to characterize this this area? So I'm just throwing out a couple more ideas for folks. I think that let's see. Okay, yeah, I'm going to go in this order. So there's a lot of actually, I'm going to go over here. Okay, let's do this first. Okay, I'm going to another 1 to 2 minute quick write. Okay, so just somewhere else on your paper, you can flip it over if you want. Okay, so we sort of talked a little about research, evaluation, assessment. I'm just wondering if we could get our ideas out in this room about who are we together right now. But before we sort of share out, I thought we should each take a second and sort of think about who we are. So I just have a list of 5 quick things to write down. So number 1 is, do you have experience as a practitioner in informal physics programs? Like someone who facilitates them? Number 2 is, do you have experience as a researcher or evaluator of informal physics programs? It doesn't have to be your full job, but have you done that to some degree? Number 3, do you identify as someone who is both those things or just one or just the other? If you had 10 extra seconds, you could explore why. And then I'm interested to sort of say, what do we say? Do you think that you personally have done research, or would you call it assessment? Would you call it evaluation? Or D, none, right? D, not really. And then if you do sort of feel like you have done work in some of these, just what's a quick description maybe of what that is, just 5 to 10 words, not like a long time. Because what I want to say is that a lot of people in this room have so much great expertise as researchers, as practitioners. And so I can't give a literature review of everyone's research, even of just the wonderful people here. But if we can get those ideas out now, then we can maybe feel more comfortable sharing with each other in the groups as we break into them about our own work that we've been doing, right? Okay, I think as I read them, people are already getting started, so I'm going to give everyone a minute, and let's see if we can get our thoughts out. I'm wondering if we could do a show of hands, if you feel comfortable. Who in here has experience, said yes to I have experience as a practitioner? Okay, and I also want us to look around, right? Okay, cool. All right. Who said yes to having experience as a researcher or evaluator? Okay, so we're looking around. So great. So let's see, this is an interesting one. So who feels like they identify as both a researcher and practitioner? Okay, so maybe similar groups. Okay, so that's interesting too, right? And then let's just see, of folks in those categories, who would say that they do research? Okay. Who would say that they do assessment? Okay, different a little bit. And then how about evaluation? Okay. Maybe some people are doing all of those things, or not sure if we need to differentiate necessarily, right? Okay, cool. So I just think that to me is interesting as we go into the next conversation about who in our community is doing work, what expertise do they bring, and how can we work together to do this? So I just want people to feel comfortable sharing with each other as we go forward, because all of this is really valuable, right? Okay. And then the last couple, just have a couple quick last sort of slides before we go into breakout groups, is that there's just some other important thoughts. I think that in terms of folks who are maybe putting some negative or question marks or things like that. In doing research and talking to practitioners and facilitators of programs, that there's just some challenges that come with this specific environment of informal physics, right? So number one, informal programs are voluntary. You have often mixed audiences, they're often short term, they're very dynamic, right? Often the outcomes you're looking for are focused on interest and identity and not like standardized tests of how to measure some specific physics content knowledge, right? And so all of those things present challenges, but also a main thing is that often we are the people doing the work too, right? So that there's like a lack of resources, time, training, people power to do that work. So I think that's really important for us as we talk about like what work can we do and how can JNIPER maybe come in. I also want to comment on a couple specific, additional challenges here. So, or challenges and opportunities. So, critical, as we just saw, to informal physics ed research is this connection between research and practice, right? I think NSF had this phrase, research in service to practice, as part of the ASIL guidelines for a while. And one way that we can make sure that that's happening, that researchers aren't necessarily separate from practitioners, or we don't, we work together, is by engaging in research practice partnerships, which can give voice to the insights, experiences, and working conditions of practitioners, a lot of whom we are both, right? And then the idea there is to produce tools that will be used and have meaningful impact. And so anyway, this is just sort of a little map from the Research Plus Practice Collaboratory about how you could like work to develop and create and sustain a research practice partnership. But as you can see, this is just like a long, involved process that requires like a lot of trust and time. For this model, which can promote like equitable outcomes for all groups, we also that's like another complicated challenge, right, to think about, and opportunity. Another thing that I think is a challenge and opportunity is that there's just interdisciplinary research requires a lot of different inputs, right? So this is just an example from like one kind of related to one specific study that we've been working on, mapping the landscape, where we look at business and organizational literature, as well as community engagement scholarship, physics education research, regular, informal science ed and ed research. Those are all different journals and places and programs, right, that can help inform, and that's a lot to sort of manage and navigate. And so when you're thinking about, going forward and developing research questions, as we're going to think about, and designing research studies and developing research practice partnerships, thinking about the challenges is really part of what we need to do. So I'm just going to kind of take a minute and say that in my work, which is not my work, it is the work of many, many people, there have been some big categories of things that I have been privileged, been excited to look at, and audience experiences, university students' experiences, identity inclusion, and also just, again, like as a system of informal physics. And so I think that there's just a lot of space for folks to study their own programs, to study other programs, to continue to build up our knowledge base and our connections to each other. And all this work has been done by so many people that I work with. These are just people who are connected to Michigan State, where I met, and special shout outs to Brianne and Brian, who are here, who generated so much amazing research. And I also just want to acknowledge that a lot of work that we did could not have been done without NSF funding, with like graduate student funding and undergraduate funding that came from a lot of different sources. And that the expertise that I feel like I gained starting as a practitioner and moving more into research came from here, being in a really generative and awesome environment with experts in PER. So that is so I'm just going to skip to the, to sort of I know there's going to be a transition, or I've made a sort of transition thing, but when we're thinking about doing Okay, yeah, where are we heading? When we're thinking about where we're heading, I think these are some of the questions that we want to talk about in our groups that we're going to split into. And one thing that people talk about a lot, I'll just say, is this idea of like we need some tools and resources to help us, right? Depending on what your capacity is, your local circumstances. And there are tools that exist from other fields, there are tools that exist in our field, but it's also challenging to sort of have, it's challenging because of that variety and because of that important local context that we all have, right? So I think that's part of the nature of us finding our way. That's maybe my comment on that, is that requires a lot of work. So I think that is sort of what I was tasked to do, is give a little bit of an overview of some ideas about research, and then we're going to go off and talk about it more. Does that sound right? Okay. All right. Thanks.